Hello?
Hello?
Hi, Warren. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Good. I am actually in rural Italy, in Calabria. So, and the connection here is okay, but it's not perfect. Do you think it would be too much if you turn off the video and we just stick with the audio? Because it might just make the audio worse. There is like a sign there with the camera, yeah, which you can click.
No. Okay.
No, it's okay. If you don't see it, it's on Skype. It's just this camera with a sign. If you don't see it, we'll turn it on. We'll leave it on. That's fine.
Yeah.
You have a help.
Oh, we don't want to.
Excellent. It's been done. No. Good.
Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's sort of a mini holiday has begun, and my girlfriend's family is from here, from Calabria, but she is in Ecuador right now, so I'm here by myself with some of her in-laws. And you are in Sweden?
Yeah, I'm at the farm.
Good. I was trying to track you down, so I called somebody in Norway, and I spoke to somebody. I'm not sure who that young woman was, but it could have been your niece, no?
No, it was probably at my house.
Somebody at your house, yeah. Spoke very good English.
Well, that's a friend.
Okay.
She's staying there. We're spending most of our time here at the farm. And
good.
She's there.
All right. I don't know if you had a chance to saw the questions I sent you last week.
No, I didn't store them. I didn't even see them.
Okay. Well, I sent you about 9 or 10 questions, just thinking that, it might be better if I send them in advance so that you have some time to think them through. But it's okay. We can also do them now over Skype.
Let's do that.
And I will just send them to you anyhow afterwards in case you want to think them through.
That's good.
As I have been navigating all these archives, and I've seen quite a few. I've been to McCulloch's archive, I've been to Gordon Pusk's archive, I've been to Edward Hall's archive, so I've seen a lot of people that you have been working quite closely with. I think I have somewhat better questions, also very specific questions about particular individuals and their connections. So, question I think that might get us started is how much interaction, if any, did you have with a woman called Rowena Swanson, who ran that unit, who was the deputy in that unit in the Air Force? Yes.
Yeah. I liked her. I met her. She arranged me, quite surprisingly, to go to a conference on mathematics, which I found very interesting. And she worked closely with Warren.
Yes.
So she was Warren's connection to the research group, to the research people in the Air Force.
Yes.
And
but you've met her several times.
The Navy, I think it was.
It was the Air Force, for sure.
It was the Air Force. And the Air Force research he was very close to her and close to that whole group. So, and she was a very nice person, and she was somebody who liked to get things done. But, I didn't have any personal contact with her, really.
Sure. And did you ever try pitching her anything that you were doing at the lab or elsewhere, or not really?
No, there was much, Warren, the lab was after Warren's time, after I left MIT. And Warren was doing his thing, and I think he was, I don't know exactly where he was at that time. He was continuing, but our relationship was not so strong after I left MIT. And so...
The reason I'm asking is because I found a letter from her to McCulloch where in passing she refers to having met Avery Johnson in a context that would suggest that he was there to try to pitch her something. And I think it was, obviously it was while he was still working with Avery. So, but again, it could have been just something minor. It was very hard to judge from the letter. So I just wanted to get a grasp of to what extent you interacted with her and also her boss. I don't know if you ever met her boss, Harold Wooster.
Harold?
Wooster.
No.
No, he was the big boss. Well, he was the boss and she was the deputy.
But I would say that she was very important in this whole operation. She could provide money when she wanted to.
And she was relatively young, as far as I understand. She was younger than you, or?
No, I didn't think she was so young.
Well, by a few years. Apparently, she's still alive. She lives somewhere in Virginia, but doesn't want to talk to anybody. I tracked her down. That they shut down that office in the late 60s, so she had to find a second career, and eventually she ended up again working for the government, but I don't think she was very happy with how she was treated, because that office was shut down, and so, essentially all the work went to nothing.
Between you and me, it seems to me that the whole cybernetics group didn't get much support. They got support, but they weren't given publicity. Was the whole business of cybernetics was never really supported. Here is an important development, a development which requires that people first and most important, get the idea of positive feedback and negative feedback, and accelerating feedback loops and things of that sort, which are very important now in terms of our crisis in the weather and global warming.
Sure.
And somehow, and MIT somehow didn't want to be identified as with cybernetics at all. It was almost like they had something against it. And I never could understand why. And Warren was kept in the cellar, if you know what I mean. He literally was in the cellar.
Sure.
In the famous building, but and they wanted to make him come up the system probably, but he didn't want to play the game of being teaching and all that sort of stuff. He had his team and his friends all over the world, and important scientists, but he didn't really want to be a ordinary professor, I think. But on the other hand, they also didn't want him to be, I don't even think they wanted him to be there. It's very strange.
It's possible, actually. I found some evidence to that effect. Especially, in the 50s, this was definitely true because he had this ongoing conflict with Wiener. And Wiener, had much more authority at MIT, and I think that at some point I saw a letter between Wiener and the president of MIT where, the president of MIT said, if needed, we will get rid of Warren to keep you on our staff. So, there is some truth to what you're saying, for sure. But let me just switch tracks a little bit, and then I'll get back to MIT and cybernetics. I never asked you this, but, as you well know, in the 50s and 60s, a lot of psychiatrists and doctors were very excited about the potential of LSD when it comes to treating psychiatric and other sort of, alcoholics and other sorts of problems. Have you ever had any encounters with that crowd of people, Humphrey Osmond, Abraham Hoffer, who were actually working in Canada? And I would like to know more because we never talked about it, and I now discovered that they were actually very important on the scene, also very important for Edward Hall, who knew Osmond quite well. And there was a guy in Canada working together with Osmond, an architect called Kiyoshi Izumi, Joe Izumi, who was actually designing all those psychiatric hospitals and wards for patients taking LSD. I only discovered it now, but just tell me a little bit more about your connections to this crowd.
Well, my life was changed by the LSD. I think I mentioned that to you, I'm not sure. But the story on that, I think, as I told you, my psychoanalyst was at Chestnut Lodge. And Chestnut Lodge was given the job of exploring LSD. Because I guess it was the CIA, they didn't identify who they were. But what she told me is that they were concerned that there was this chemical that causes change in people, and that the government wanted to explore it because it could be a secret weapon. Because it could be given in the water supply to a town, for example, and the town would no longer be able to defend itself.
Yes.
And that's true. It didn't take much LSD to throw everything off. So I think I told you,
yes.
When I took it, I took only half as much as the others because that's the kind of person I am. And I was amazed at the results of the LSD because I was in another kind of reality. And for the first time in my life, I saw three-dimensionally. That will sound very strange, but one eye, I'm not cross-eyed, but it's going out the other direction. One eye's to the right and one's to the left. Just a little bit. So, from my childhood, I had always used one eye at a time, as it were. And then to see space as space was quite a remarkable affair, I can assure you. Looking at the trees and seeing the space between the trees. This is very hard for anybody who's never experienced this to understand. But if you think of you're living in a two-dimensional world, you see the trees in space as on a flat picture. And then suddenly you see that one tree is behind the other in some way that is other than mental. And that was one of the main things. And then the second thing was the psychoanalyst was upstairs and she recorded my whole session. And I should say she recorded my interview with her, but I also then did as she requested, which is record the whole session. When she was not, I was not interacting with her. And the amazing thing was, if we have time, my wife was coming up the stairs, and I was annoyed with her, which was not unusual for me, and I was suddenly shocked to realize that she had been coming up the stairs, and as far as I was concerned, I kept her coming up the stairs much longer. It was annoying to have her come up the stairs. I kept her coming up the stairs in my mind as if she was actually coming up the stairs when the stairs long ago had stopped. And so I was maintaining this negativity in spite of the fact that it didn't exist. That was quite a shock to me to realize that one does that sort of thing, you know. One changes the reality in order to fit with your mental emotions. And then the second thing that happened, which was very important, is my friend Bob Lautman, who's now gone.
How do you spell his last name?
Lautman. Robert. And he is an important person too in his own right, because Robert was A photographer for the, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned him already, I remember. He did Washington Post. No, he did the photography for architectural.
No, well, he was doing Smithsonian Institute.
Uh-huh.
He was one of their main photographers, and he got a medal and all that sort of stuff.
Uh-huh.
So he's much appreciated.
Uh-huh.
So Bob and I had got to know this young lady who Bob thought, gosh, Warren, she's so bright. Why don't we get her to medical school? She's interested in medicine. We weren't involved with her so much as, she was not our girlfriend or anything, but, it was interesting. So then she was present after I went to listen to this LSD experience on the tape. In other words, I was no longer in it. I didn't think I was. It was the following day or the day after that, 2 days after. I think I still must have been in it because she just said, look at your life, Warren. Look at it, listen to yourself. And I listened to myself talking about everything, and I thought, what a big asshole that guy is. He's just talking and talking and talking as if he was important, and at the same time he's really saying nothing much. And then she was saying to me, the way you're going, Warren, your family will, they have their reality, but you're putting them into this reality that really is stupid. Being the big psychiatrist and the big, the Papa Baddie and all that stuff, but you're really not paying attention to who the children are or to who anybody is, your wife or whatever. So in other words, and she impressed me with the fact that, wanting to become, I lived at that point in a house in Georgetown, and a big house in Georgetown in the fancy part of town, which I sort of managed to negotiate with my wife's help. And because she was interested in real estate. So we bought a cheap house. I hope I'm not going on too long, but we bought a cheap house and then fixed it up because it was right in the middle of, right up at the edge of Georgetown. So we extended Georgetown just slightly. And then we had a big Georgetown house and so on. And, the idea was climb up the ladder. And she just pointed that out to me, and I just said, that's not me. I'm not going to climb up the ladder. And so that was the beginning of my leaving the ladder and leaving all that.
But I'll just want to ask you a follow-up on that. So, actually, several. So, this experience of space that you experienced differently after LSD, to what extent you think it influenced your subsequent thinking about the space, as you put it in your subsequent articles on sort of this intelligent spaces that adapt to the users? I mean, to what extent you think LSD was, or experiences LSD was a way to try to produce these different kinds of space with the help of technology and not with the help of LSD? This is what I'm saying. To what extent technology, as you saw it, and cybernetics, as you saw it, would have been a good substitute to the kinds of effects that you have experienced under LSD for this kind of richer, fuller experience of space? I mean, maybe there is no connection. I'm just trying to interpret what you said.
I think it's a good question. And it's a very good question. And I have to think about it because I think the LSD sort of, it knocked me out of, it knocked me closer in to understanding that there are some things which have to do with perception. which people ordinarily don't get. And it's time that they did get it. That it was something that was important. And that many people lived in this space without having any understanding that it existed. And the whole idea that there was aspects of resistance, I can say, aspects of knowing that were not included in everyday knowing. In other words, people were not perceiving things which were fundamentally important to perceive. And the capacity to perceive the reality which was existing and not, it wasn't denying it or anything of that sort. It was much more basic than that. So it helped me to get into the fact that there were aspects of reality which were fundamental, which people had somehow not really the ability to perceive. They were not because of emotional crap, which I learned in psychoanalysis, but because these were empty spaces, which were empty because they didn't have the capacity to perceive them, not because of emotionally different. It's now, at this point, the most important thing is that people are not able to perceive the earth itself. And the whole global crisis is one that they can't perceive it. The earth is too big.
Sure.
And two, they don't want to perceive it anyway. But that I'm not. I could make a story about it. Don't want to see it.
But can I just push you a little bit on what this alternative explanation would entail? So, if it's not a question of them not having any emotional, trauma, and this is not why they cannot perceive those spaces, then what is the alternative explanation why they cannot perceive them? I mean, there are multiple you can think about. It can be related to capitalism, can be related to mechanization, can be related to many things. I mean, what do you think is the path? Forget about what you think now. Like, what was the sort of alternative explanation that you embraced in the early 60s? So if it was not the fact that they were emotionally unstable or whatever that made it impossible for them to perceive those spaces.
Stuff I just really I threw out the window a lot of it.
So
I really felt that the important thing was not the emotional stuff, and not the denial, and not the Freudian stuff at all, but rather that.
So what is it, the critique of bureaucracy? Was it the critique of capitalism? In some of the essays you talk about this mini-max, whatever, logic, right? And was it that, or like what replaces psychoanalysis in your explanatory paradigm?
Well, psychoanalysis,
Freudian kind of. Yeah.
Freudian analysis, and me and Ned Hall had much in common in this area, because Ned was concerned that people didn't see space. He didn't know it existed, and yet it determined their behavior in such a, just like the birds. And Schaeffer also saw the same thing. The behavior was very much related to the concept of space and being able to perceive the spatial relations of people to each other and the whole language of the way we use space and the way that we maneuver without even knowing it in space. And it's something that's so important it doesn't exist. it's a fundamental. And so and it doesn't exist because people have learned in their education that they haven't learned that it doesn't exist. Not at all. They just went glib of it. They sort of it wasn't a part of the reality that existed. Now, if you follow me, because this is very important in my way of thinking, that some things, they really are not, they don't enter into the people's way of relating. They don't know that it exists. They don't have the, just like most people don't know that capitalism exists.
Sure.
But they have no idea of the influence of capitalism and this whole system. They don't understand that, and it's not a matter of understanding. It's a matter, it doesn't exist. The force exister is what I used to say. It's forbidden to exist. But it's not an active mental process. It's something that has much more negation in it. It's not because I don't want it to exist. It's not because I don't perceive it. It just doesn't exist because it hasn't been, partly because it hasn't been named. And this is the whole universe of humans. It's much that doesn't exist because it hasn't been named, and because if it has been given names, these names are technical.
Sure. But I just want to ask you a question here, which, there is no right or wrong answer here. It's just I want to see your opinion on this. But sometime in the early 80s, there is clearly an emergence of a very different way of talking about space. And I refer specifically to the emergence of this new paradigm of cyberspace. Everybody seems to be talking about it. All of a sudden, this idea of a new alternative space that exists somewhere, but that's not real, but also in a sense real completely, it just takes over the public conversation. I mean, this is all we talk about in the 80s and 90s. I mean, in the last decade, almost not at all. But in the 80s, there is this completely unpredictable rise of cyberspace as this alternative utopian space. Did you envision it at all? Do you think that it somehow ties together some of these insights of you, of Hall, of McLuhan, of Schaefer, of other people, of Gordon Pask, who are thinking about spaces and cybernetics into a coherent concept? Or do you see it as something that's completely unrelated to what you have just been describing to me as a different kind of space?
Well, I think it's very much a part of what we were working with. And we wouldn't have called it cyberspace because then we weren't that advanced into cyber at that time. It was just that a new kind of space emerged with the computer because, and this was information space, but it was information space that didn't have a previous identity because nobody had really talked about, I mean, McLuhan was really in many respects one of the early people who talked about space as information space. The medium is the message. Was in a sense talking about something again which was completely unidentified. It had no existence. And the lack of existence somehow was interfered with because the space began to be filled with information. And the book became, wasn't only the words anymore, it was the structure of the book. And the structure of the newspaper and the structure of the way the space was put together became something which was a reality that people were learning. Of course, they hadn't perceived it before. The books had to do with the words that were written. But for example, what's so important to me was the limitations of what you can write because of the who done what to which way of language. The structure of the language, the grammar, has much to do with people's ability to perceive.
Sure.
And what is happening now is, to my mind, the arising of complexity. It still hasn't got very far yet, but people are beginning to see that there's more than yes and no, as I call it, the two tracks for the railway. There's a complexity where yes is and no are two sides of something that, or not even two sides, they're just part of the complexity. And what you see, and then we go back to Korzybski.
Sure.
So anyway.
But Korzybski, we talked about it, but you have studied his work and have you known any other people in the Institute of General Semantics at the time? People like Hayakawa, who I think is Canadian.
The General Semantics, it was, what's his name, the famous guy, there was one guy who was leading the General Semantics. And he was sort of, his name escapes me, but he was sort of an alternative to cybernetics.
Well, in what year? So after Korzybski, you had several people there. This guy, Hayakawa. Then you had Neil Poster there at NYU, and then a few other people.
No, I didn't know. There's one man who had, it was the General Semantics Society, I think.
Yes.
And
Institute.
I went to some of his lectures, but I wasn't impressed by him because he seemed to lack this awareness of the space that wasn't filled. And the same way with Bucky Fuller. He didn't really understand that reality itself was much larger than his straight lines and his domes.
Yeah. But it would be actually good if you could think and later tell me who that person might have been. I can give you some names. Stuart Chase, maybe. Wendell Johnson. I don't know who else was doing it at the time. Sanford Behrman? No,
none of those are very familiar.
Okay, fine.
I've always been...
But do you know where you went to those lectures in Boston or in Washington? Or somewhere else?
I didn't go to lectures by these people.
No, but you said there was one man who lectures you visited. I'm just curious where that was. But it's okay. Maybe you can, maybe I'll just send you more names of people affiliated with them.
Okay.
And maybe you will...
Talking about lectures, I did go to one lecture by Norbert Wiener in the early days.
Yeah, you mentioned that actually to me somewhere. Yeah.
But this business about space, I think, it wasn't. It was something that I was involved with I was involved with some of these basics, and the other guy who sort of was my friend who arranged that I write that article for Rain Dance.
Who was that?
The artist who's still alive.
Frank Gillette?
Yeah.
Frank Gillette?
I think so.
Yeah. Oh, he's still alive for sure. Yeah.
Because Frank and I went to, did this conference with Gregory Bateson.
Yes. I found actually Bateson's notes from that conference in his archive.
Oh, he must have been rather dumbfounded.
I will send them to you. I have to find them, but I have them somewhere. So it's they're quite fun.
Yeah, I would think so, because he was really being bucked off base. You couldn't knock him off base very easily. Quite a affair.
But let me just run a few more names, and then we'll get to the factual question. So still on the LSD question, like again, Humphrey Osmond. You had any correspondence meetings with him, or you just knew his name?
No. I told you about this CIA affair.
Well, you told me of several, but which one exactly?
Well, this is the one with the school.
Where they had the blind kids interpreting
No. This is I was invited to go to a meeting where the meeting there were some other people. They didn't tell me much about it. And in Virginia. And Kahn, the great architect, was coming. Louis Kahn.
Oh, of course, yeah, he's famous, yes.
And Humphrey Osmond was there. And my friend, who's an architect in Washington, was there. Whose name I'd recognize. He became a prominent architect in Washington. And there were a number of quite honored people there. And I didn't know what it was going to be, but when I figured if the others are coming, I'm coming too. So, and we got there, and then we were told, I think we were told over the loudspeaker, I don't remember, it was a sort of strange affair, that we were there to help with the design of a school which would entice, they didn't use the word entice, but entice the children of diplomats and of foreign dignitaries, and particularly heads of government, to come to the school. And how would we build such a school, and what would be its agenda? Because they wanted to create such a school. And that's what we were told, and we were given the job in 2 days and well paid. And the payment primarily was being with these people. And so that's Humphrey Osmond. And Humphrey and I, both of us, we went for a walk. I think it was he, maybe somebody else, but I think it was mostly him. And we decided that this was the CIA, and we walked past the place which looked like a small airport. So we were quite sure it was the CIA who was arranging this. And we thought, well, no, we'll just have a little fun. So we came back and we made a parody of the whole thing. And made a big joke out of it, how we were going to get, the children of the kings and queens to come to school. Because we, the CIA was like poison to us.
And what years was that? It was already in the 60s?
60s, early 70s, one or the other.
Okay, so it wasn't in the 50s, we're talking 60s or 70s.
Yeah.
And you had no other contact with Osmond or Abram Hofer? Or this
No.
guy? Okay. Did you have any contact whatsoever with Timothy Leary at any point?
No. No, it was somebody in the distance.
But he was surely somewhere in the periphery. You knew what he was up to some extent, as a public figure.
Yeah, but I didn't agree with him. I think he was... But he was a joker, and he managed to get all this publicity, and he managed to say things that were important, and I respected that. And the Chicago 7 were my heroes.
And sort of since you mentioned Chestnut Lodge, I'll just ask you one question. Did you, because in one of your books you thanked Frida from Reichman for something. Did you actually spend much time interacting with her, or not really?
Not a lot. She was one of the people at the Institute. And she was an honored person because she'd been close to Freud. And the people that I knew were at the Washington Psychoanalytic and also some at the Boston Psychoanalytic. And they were people I respected. But I didn't want to follow their path.
Sure. Okay, no, it's not, I just saw her name, so I thought that she's prominent.
She was a very prominent person. Vieta Rank was another.
So then I have a few sort of factual questions. So is it possible that it was actually you who introduced Negroponte to Gordon Pask? Because I can't really find any other connection with Negroponte and Gordon Pask. I mean, Gordon Pask wasn't really that famous in America.
No. Well, it might have been...
Because you went to see him sometime in 63 or 64.
Yeah.
And I assume you started talking to Negroponte sometime in 66, maybe? Or earlier?
Well, it's before Negroponte. I started... Negroponte was just... Actually, I talked to him quite early about this whole business of a new way of thinking. And I think I was in...
But he was still a student doing his bachelor's or master's. By early, you really mean early.
No, when he was a student, I was teaching at the... I was at MIT.
Yes.
And I think it was when I started the school for the children of the neighborhood.
Yes.
Maybe even earlier. So he was still a student. That he had started moving away from the ordinary architectural way of thinking. And I got him sort of involved with cybernetics and the cybernetic way of thinking, and really worked hard to sort of share with him the larger picture. And then I was sort of surprised that he got going with the animals, and the animals were trained to go through mazes and the like, which was all extremely logical and very sort of constrained. It didn't have the depth of vision that I was involved with. And it upset me that he got so linear, as I've said before.
Sure. But factually, you don't recall if Pask ever came up in your...
I really loved Gordon. I think he was, I use that word, I enjoyed him, and he and I really liked each other.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sure at about the same time I may have talked about Gordon.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And,
but I don't know for sure.
Uh-huh. And Gordon mentions that at some point in 63 or 64, you and him were in Kiel in England together. Do you remember anything about that visit to a city called Kiel?
No.
Possibly a conference of some kind. Okay. No. I just saw it in one of the letters. Okay, then the next sort of factual question is, you mentioned that there was somebody at the Architectural Association in London who kind of directed you or pointed you towards Norway when you were deciding where to go. It would be really important if you can remember that person's name.
I'm going to put on a sweater for a minute.
Sure.
Just take it. I'm getting
take your time.
Hold on. Now think about it. I don't think I remember saying. I would remember if I heard it.
Okay, I'll send you a few. But what do you know anything about that person? Your connection to him? I mean, any more hints?
Well, he was at the AA. And architects, whatever it was.
Architectural Association.
Yeah, in London.
Yes.
And I liked that school very much. I liked the people there.
Did you lecture there?
No, it was not by that time I had
dropped out.
Yeah, I dropped out. And I was sort of, like you are when you're dropped out, you don't know exactly what the hell you are. And
well, maybe it was Peter Cook, who was associated with Archizum. Maybe it was Ranulf Glanville, a student of Gordon Pask. Maybe it was Alvin Boyarsky, who was its chairman. No? Okay, well, I'll have to think of others and maybe send you some names because this... But you've been in touch with that person before? Maybe it was the person who asked you to write that article for the architectural design?
No, there's no connection of that sort. This is someone I met and may have been through a visitor to our where I was with Avery.
At the lab? Or?
Yeah, not my lab, but at the when we left the lab, we went to the Avery's house, the quarry. So it probably was Hamilton was his name.
Hamilton, that's the last name.
His first name, that's his last name. His first name, I don't remember. And I think he said to me, I know this one guy at AA. You should get in touch with him when you go to London. And he, I think, was Norwegian. And because he talked about Norway, I think I told you. He said, you come to Norway and you can always get fish, so on. And so it was Hamilton, and Hamilton was one of those travelers in the 60s who sort of just wandered around and went from place to place and was a very interesting person. And he helped us build. We were building structures at that time. I built my foam house, and he helped me build a house up in a tree.
Sure. And Cedric Price, you never met?
I know of him.
Uh-huh. He did also some work with Gordon Pusk for a while.
Yeah, I know Cedric Price, but I don't remember meeting him. But I could have, but the name's quite familiar.
Okay, well, I'll send you some more names from the Architecture Association and we see what we get. Okay, I have a few more. I hope you're not too tired.
No, I'm not tired at all. I get a little cold when I'm so fascinated with what we're talking about.
Well, I'm in Calabria here. It's plus 30, so I wish it was a bit cooler.
Well, you know, my daughter has a place in I think
Tuscany. You said, yeah. Yeah. Well, it's good. Here it's very hot. But
it was very hot. She told me hundreds. It was very hot.
So a guy called John or Jack Ford, who was the sort of the CIA person responsible for cybernetics. Any meetings, opinions, anything of the kind. He was the guy instrumental in founding the American Society for Cybernetics and was its first director, I believe, for several years. Jack Ford.
No, I had no contact with him. I didn't even know who he was. I mean, I know that Warren...
Well, he put Warren as his honorary chairman, so Jim Warren and him must have connected really well. But you don't recall any...
No, I don't recall anything.
Okay, then another kind of factual question. You know, I saw quite a few letters dating to the early 60s even, and mid-60s, between McCulloch and Peter Osser. And I'm just like, I have no idea what their exact connection was. But
Peter's the one who...
gave you money, that I know. But was it McCulloch who connected you two? Or
were connected.
You didn't know?
I didn't know.
But how, I mean, you must have told me the story already, but just to repeat, how did Osser's money find you, so to say? Do you think it might have been McCulloch who helped that money to find you, or you think it's impossible?
Well, you see, I don't know. But let me say that I went from... I'm blocking for a moment. The guy who worked at MIT in the project...
Seymour Papert.
Seymour.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, I just wonder if you have any information about where he is now. But anyway.
Seymour is in deep... no, he's not in deep coma, but he had an accident in Vietnam.
I know that.
So he didn't recover.
Okay. Anyway, Seymour suggested that I was going to Europe. Did I see Peter Osser? And I had no knowledge of Peter Osser at all, or who he was, or anything about him. So it was completely Seymour who organized that. And in many respects, I consider Seymour the brains behind that whole operation. He was the one who was menschlich, you know. The others were not. Anyway, Seymour is a beautiful man. And Seymour said, you know, you have to meet Peter Osser. And then Peter I had one interview with Peter in Europe, and I always remember because it was such a crazy, wonderful interview because Peter is a very special guy. And Peter said, well, you know, Warren, I'll send you some money and we'll get together and talk about it. And I had, you know, I wanted to go ahead the next step in my development, in the development of the laboratory. But I didn't imagine that anybody could give me that amount of money. It was quite beyond my conception. And then he arrived on the scene. So it may well be that Peter and Warren had some connection, but this was never revealed to me.
But did you know the connection between Seymour and Osser? What connected them?
I don't know. I often suspected the money had come from the intelligence people, but I had no idea.
But Osser was also in Switzerland, like Seymour, before he immigrated. Or where did you meet Osser?
I met Osser in I think it was Geneva.
Which is where... But he was American or Swiss or...
He was living in Switzerland. He had built himself a beautiful house of stone in a very fancy part of the city in Geneva. And it was like a simple castle, but a cave. Quite unusual. And he built that after I think we met. And Seymour...
But was he Swiss?
He was Swiss. But his money was American. His money came from International Harvester, McCormick. He was part of the McCormick family. And he had lived the life of someone who had brought up a child at Lindbergh's time, I guess, because he was completely protected from the problem of being kidnapped and all that sort of stuff. When he was a child, and he lived mostly in hotels and stuff. And a very special life. And he had all this money, and every few years he had a project. And then I became one of his projects. And another project was taking teak trees down one of the Congo River or something like that, selling. And they all sank in the process. And a lot of his things didn't work. I met his sister in Switzerland, and she seemed like a nice person, and she just said that he had many projects that, he did his own way. And, it's something you can do when you're very rich. But the connection, or the details of the connection between Seymour and Peter, I didn't really get into.
Okay.
I just didn't think of it. I was so completely in love with using the money well and the things that I wanted to do.
Okay, that makes sense. And I mean, I just remember you mentioned Chicago, 7, yeah? But I don't know whether you meant it seriously or not, but was Abby Hoffman somebody you saw as a...
I just admire them. They were, in the 60s, we were all hippies together, and they were the people who were identified as hippies, And Avery and I were identified as hippies, but we were really not playing the completely open hippie game as most other people were, who were not really into drugs, except we explored them and weren't into using them for,
Sure. And did you spend any time on the West Coast in the 60s or 70s in San Francisco, in that area, in the Bay Area?
No, Avery and I gave lectures at the University of California.
At Berkeley or where?
No, it's not Berkeley. It's the big university, which is a little bit south of. It's not as famous as.
Okay, what is there? Is it where Bateson eventually settled? Santa Cruz?
No.
Santa Barbara, but it's really closer to LA.
No, you're talking about the University of California.
Stanford.
And I shouldn't have used that word. It's University of...
San Francisco.
San Francisco, I think so. Something like that.
Okay, but a name like Lee Felsenstein and the Community Memory Project does not ring any bells?
No.
Okay, I think Avery got involved with them, but it was mostly in the 80s. Okay, then I have a question, actually somewhat connected to the Norwegian part. Did you, I kind of, in a sort of very weird way, I've stumbled upon Christian Nygaard, whom, I don't know, you might know who he was, probably you do. Christian Nygaard, who was, maybe you don't write it that way, maybe you write it Nygaard.
No, it's spelled Nygaard.
Yeah, but did you ever meet him in Norway? Or?
No, but I heard about him.
Because, no, curiously enough, he, Seymour, and Negroponte had a project together in Paris in the early 80s, that World Center for Computing that the French government invited Negroponte to build. And he was initially invited also, and Nygaard was invited also to be part of it, but he proved to be too political for Negroponte, so they got rid of him. Because he was very much involved with trade unions in Norway, and he was very much involved with sort of use computers for sort of socialist purposes, but you have not had much interaction other than just knowing him as a public figure in Norway.
The only thing, no, and I didn't meet him, and I didn't really. He was on the left, but he wasn't my left. And he was a respected man in his own way. But you remind me of...
He built this very famous computer language back in the 60s, and Simula it's called. Then they started building other things. Then
I did meet him, actually, but I'm pretty sure I came in contact with him one way or another. And he is still too straight for me. And straight by that I mean linear. And I think I was invited to get close to him, but I decided no, he's not of interest. And he was related to the work that was developing new languages. I remember now.
And I actually have just one question, but it might take a while for you to answer, and so some of it might have to wait until we get together. But and actually, anyway, okay, I'll continue with this. Well, let me ask you one more thing before I ask you the big question. Let me ask you one factual question. When you were at Chestnut Lodge and when you interacted with Ned Hall there, did you ever meet one of his linguist friends whose last name was Traeger?
He talked about Traeger. I didn't meet him. I don't think he was at Chestnut Lodge.
Well, he was at Georgetown for sure, but I meant you were at Chestnut Lodge. Yeah.
I was not at Chestnut Lodge.
Well, sure. You're a psychiatrist.
I was close to the people.
You were close
to
those people.
Yes. From Chestnut Lodge, or close to Chestnut Lodge. And I knew the people at Chestnut Lodge a little bit. But they had very famous people there who were, they were really quite at the top of the heap when it comes to psychoanalysis.
So your association in Washington when you were doing psychiatry was with a hospital?
No, we had I was with NIH, the National Institutes of Health, and the National Institutes of Mental Health, and that's where my association was, and I was with...
So when Edward Hall writes in his biography that you had offices close to each other, it was in that building?
No, it was in the Washington School of Psychiatry.
So you also had an office in the Washington School of Psychiatry.
I had an office in the Washington School of Psychiatry.
Okay, this is what I had in mind. But Washington School of Psychiatry and Chestnut Lodge overlapped, but were not the same institution.
They were not the same institution, no.
Okay. Fine. So this Traeger guy, other than he mentioned him, nothing else?
No, he talked about Traeger. He was close to Traeger. And but he didn't talk very personally about him. It was just sort of one of the people that I knew he was involved with.
And did you ever, through Hall or through your other connections, did you ever get to read Worf and Sapir on linguistics and language? Benjamin Worf and Edward Sapir, they're famous for this Worf-Sapir hypothesis that language is kind of culturally specific and culturally relative. And to some extent it inspired then Ned Hall to apply the same framework to think about space.
Well...
And some people would also lump Korzybski there, and they would say that it's the Worf-Sapir-Korzybski hypothesis.
Well, I did read it. I read... I remember Worf, and I think I was fascinated by what I read, too. But they were not people who were prominent in my thinking about it. But I thought Worf was quite an interesting person. I mean, I didn't meet him.
No, he died in the 40s, so...
Yeah. Korzybski I read. I read parts of it. I didn't read his whole book. It was just too much. A big, thick book of quite complex things, which didn't really interest me, but the main theme interested me very much.
And just on that crowd, and Ted Carpenter?
Ted Carpenter was up... He was up in
Canada
Alaska
for a while, and then somewhere in California.
Yeah, well, Ted Carpenter, I don't think I met him, but he was also close to Ned.
For sure.
And Carpenter had done this wonderful book on the Eskimos, which I considered just a beautiful, beautiful book. And it was a movie. It was a movie about them. And I think Ned got me to see it. And it's just completely fascinating. If you could ever get a copy, you'd enjoy it.
No, I know it. I know the film. And did your conversations with McLuhan and I didn't mean Carpenter, but your conversations with McLuhan, did he ever mention a guy called Howard Gossage?
Howard Gossage?
Yeah.
No, not that I recall.
Okay. He was the guy who ran the advertising agency in San Francisco, which basically made McLuhan into this superstar. But there was an actual organized effort behind it. It wasn't just spontaneous. All right. But the big kind of meaty question I wanted to ask is, and we can continue that when we meet in person, but to at least start outlining the kind of rationale that made you pursue the projects you pursued while you settled in Norway. Yes, and I'm not talking about your work at the foundry or your political work, which of course is also interesting. We discussed it, but the actual technological and business projects. I remember there was something related to this materials, right? You kind of tried to pursue the idea of soft materials also in Norway with a glove or something like that. It would just be good to know how your thinking has changed until when you settled in Norway, and also. Like for me, I'll just tell you why I think it's interesting is because, people who are working on virtual reality in the United States and also in cyberspace, they also got obsessed with manufacturing gloves and all sorts of other sort of soft objects. And I'm just curious to what extent you were ahead of them, you were trying to do what they were doing, to what extent those were completely unrelated developments. Just walk me a little bit through what you've been doing technologically and commercially once you moved to Norway.
Yeah.
And, again, I just have to tell you, the commercial success of it is not of interest to me. I just want to understand where these ideas went, in your head. I'm not trying to make an assessment of how commercially viable these projects were. It's of no importance for me.
Well, I continued here with trying to make, I can show you several things. I worked with an engineer here who was a very competent engineer, but not the most imaginative guy in the world. And first I started a project of my own, which I mostly suppressed, I guess. And the project of my own had to do with making a means of transmitting touch from one place to another. And so that the surgeon could be able to feel when he was working inside the body and the blood was in the field, he could still feel under his fingers when he'd come against an artery, pulsing or something like that, where he could feel the muscles, and he could have a tactile sense of what he couldn't see. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
I'm just going out to the store.
Okay. So I started to work on tactile systems, and the idea was that we could simulate the touch sense could be extended, just like we extend with computer, telephone, etc. The spatial sense could be extended as well. And I was quite much before the guys before this became something that was common. In fact, it still isn't common. It still is an area which needs to be researched and needs to be worked at. And with Avery, we talked about, at our laboratory, the EL lab, we talked in the film about why aren't we using, instead of typing, yes, no,
Yes, I remember that. Yeah, you wanted tactile interfaces. I remember that.
Yeah, and so I really continued to pursue the tactile interface when I came to Norway. And I got money for doing that as well from a Norwegian. I'm not sure how I got it at the moment. I hadn't thought much about it. So I had several years I was working on this. And
we're still talking about the 70s, or it's already early 80s?
Well, I came to Norway in 1972.
Yeah, sure.
So it's still the 70s.
And you started, because I thought you had this period where you went to work at this foundry and then you spent some time in China, or you immediately started continuing it as you got to Norway?
Let me think about it, actually, because I sort of suppressed some of this. When it came to Norway, I sort of, what happened was that after I came back from China, all this leftist stuff was somehow China was the haven for it all. I belong to AKP, and AKP, Arbeiternes Communist Party, and work politically. I never was involved with, being aggressive in the sense of being fighting and blah blah blah, etc. Being somebody but the ideas fascinated me, and Mao's ideas fascinated me. I read it extensively in his, and there was a lot of good sense there. Then I went to China. I could tell you a long story of that. And I came back. I went there in 1980. I'd been there in 1975. I went there in 1982. 75 was for a few weeks. And then 80 for a year. And when I came back after being there, I had a lot of experience with trying to teach engineers about medicine and do this in my own way. I was sorely dismayed with my experience in China. People were lovely and my relationships were good. And they wanted me to lecture all over China, and I refused to do that. I didn't feel I had that much to give. But I was really quite disappointed with what I saw in China. So I decided, well, okay. Let's go again back to this time now we'll go to being a businessman. And so I managed to get research money and started a small business. And I have to think about that more because I have sort of left it behind. And I got research money, and along with my money, but then I had a friend, Mr. Westwick, who was a person who had a lot of connections, and she was involved, and she helped me we made a film about what could be done with touch. And
you never mentioned that film. You have it. Maybe it would be nice to put it in the archives.
And the idea was I took one of the units which we built for making this material which could expand and contract and change color, etc., which was the lab in Boston's work. I took one of the units, and I said, if I can make one unit which is a bubble of freon, some other gas, and heat it and cool it, enough so that it would expand and contract on computer control. Then I would have something under my fingers, under my 5 fingers, that would expand and contract in relation to information that it had from a distance. And so we made that system. And I was told it was too slow and it would never be important. But then touch is not necessarily fast. Touch has other characteristics than visual things and so on. It's a slow process. So I made this controller, which was such that you could press with your fingers on these bubbles, and the bubble would register how much you pressed. And at the same time, the bubble could press back by expanding under your fingers. So we had a two-way system in touch. And then the problem was to find applications which people could really wanted to use.
Sure.
And Norway at that time was bubbling with people who had money because it was the beginning of the oil boom.
Uh-huh.
And I had... so I got money. And then we made such an interface.
Uh-huh.
And then we tried to sell it. Well, the people I was selling it with was one was an architect, another businessman. But I started off from scratch. In other words, to build this system, I just started out by getting this interactive system, by getting a car which would bump against the wall, a toy car, I'm sorry. And when it bumped against the walls, it would retract. And in other words, I started to get the action. And I gradually moved into the tactile affair. And I don't have any experience as an engineer, except what I learned myself.
Sure.
Training. So I gradually moved ahead to the point that I had this system which could work and you could perceive. For example, an example is if you have a man who's on the top of a tower on a building which is controlling something on the ground. And he's sitting way up on the tower above where they're building the building. You know what I mean, I think.
Yeah, sure.
And then there's somebody down, and the way it works in Norway is the man on the ground shouts and waves his arms and says, yeah, okay, a little closer, a little to the left, a little to the right, and so on. They don't even use loudspeakers. And they just scream at each other. And I could substitute that the man could feel when it something touched or even came close to something you wanted to pick up, because being close to is not very difficult. You just put something on the thing you're picking up and it's sending a message.
But Warren, let me ask you this. So, you're working in all these projects in the 80s and, maybe even 70s, already having left the U.S. And I'm just trying to understand your rationale for this. Yes, it's fine if you could say, I just wanted to make money by setting up a company, which doesn't sound like it was the case, because you yourself state that you first invented those things and then you kind of struggled to actually find uses for them. So the usual corporate kind of explanation probably doesn't work. And then, and if it was not corporate, but it had some kind of broader social and political vision behind it, what was it? Did you try to create a more humane capitalism, or did you have some other idea? I'm just trying to understand what prompted you to continue working on the same path, or more or less the same path that you were on, kind of in America. Or correct me if maybe it was a very different path.
No, it's the same path. No, I felt that again we were enlarging the space that people could perceive in, so that they could perceive, they could use their senses in a new way and enrich and become able to sort of extend their senses, so they were reaching out with their senses through this. I wouldn't have thought of it that way then, but that cyberspace should include touch, tactile sense. And I still feel very strongly that this is the big problem, that cyberspace is information, but the information doesn't have a body.
Sure. No, I understand the sort of the cyber theory component of it. I'm just again trying to understand the political ramifications here. So after you come back from China, your correct me if I get it right or not, but your understanding is that basically Europe and America are stuck with capitalism. Communism you saw in China does not seem to be much better. So what else is there to be done? Well, at least we can make more interactive, humane technologies that can enlarge our sensory potential. Is it a fair summary, or is there something I'm missing? And particularly on sort of how you saw this work fit into sort of the political environment you were in, because I've read some of your letters from early 70s, immediately after you left Norway and while you were still in America. I mean, there is a very harsh critique of American capitalism in those letters. I mean, they are not by any means soft. You are very bitter about the system. I'm just trying to understand how a decade later you kind of, was it really the visit to China that convinced you that there is just no other way, or something else happens?
No, I think it's, my life is a little bit unusual in the sense that I am not just a thinker. Mm-hmm. I'm not just a theorist. Mm-hmm. I need to practice.
Sure.
To do things. Uh-huh. And I don't really do them because of money, no. Uh-huh. But I also need money like other people. Uh-huh. And that's, and need, to do something meaningful. Uh-huh. I'm not just a theorist or an experimenter or anything. I need to do things that are original in my way. Uh-huh. And that contribute to something that's meaningful. Uh-huh. And so it wouldn't be, to my idealistic side, Norway had the potential for creating something good because it had money from the oil. Uh-huh. And then what could they do with this money? It might be useful as part of it. And there's, I have my devils like everybody else. And yes, being, again, a man who has some stature is all important and is also important. I'm not beyond that. Uh-huh. But at the same time, to increase the human capacity to go beyond the limitations which we live in has been my purpose. Uh-huh. And to increase the living quality of human beings, and so that they cannot be restricted by these rules and regulations which assume that a man is a piece of machinery. And so then I simulated machinery so that then you know more about it, what is the technical. When I left psychiatry, I was not accepting the fact that Freud and all these people were just talking about the words and feelings, which are words, because the feelings, the way we describe feelings is, anger.
I'm back.
Yeah. And all these things. Uh-huh. But there is a mechanism which is, there are aspects which are quite beyond the words. They are a part of being alive and experiencing alive. And all the creatures experience aliveness too.
Sure.
As I say, I don't want to go into a long dissertation on this but the aliveness includes sensing and doing And I think the sensing is present in all living systems, and that includes the parts of living system. The cells of our bodies are also have intelligence, and they have the capacity to explore and to do things, and then find out how they work, and so on and so forth. And so I was just going on with this process of how do you find out about more basic sides of our living. In the family, as a psychiatrist, I ended up trying to figure out what is basic to a family, not its feelings, or people are having trouble talking to each other. So they're talking to each other. But what is the essence of communication? What's the essence of communication? It isn't the words they transfer. It's here we are sitting here, and their faces are telling stories, their bodies are telling other stories, their smells are telling other stories. And this is a very complex situation, and they're relating to the whole room, and they're relating to all they've learned since they were children, and learning basic ways of excluding important things. All of this is this is what I want to know, because I need to know that, because then I can be useful to people. And arguing back and forth with them, like a psychiatrist, and sort of teaching them in the old stuff over again is whether you should love or not love it, blah, 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 etc. It's not really what it's all about. Other people can do that, but that's not my business. My business is somehow getting at basics, essentials that are a part of the organism, which are very much out of consciousness, but exist as major themes in our lives, major mechanisms. I don't like the word mechanisms, but being alive includes these aspects which are not a part of our language and are not a part of our normal conduct intentionally, but they're all there just the same. And they determine things much more than our language and our all of that. You understand what I mean? But
I do. And having read a lot of Basin, I also see some of the strengths that probably overlap with some of his thinking as well. And about Basin we've talked a bit, and we can continue next time. I just have one sort of factual question, factual question, and then we'll just talk about some logistics. I was also in Paul Ryan's archives, and I saw a letter there from you, basically maybe from mid-80s or mid-70s or late 70s, sort of telling him that, you don't exactly remember why you no longer speak to each other, but it would be nice to make up. Did he ever respond to that email or not? Because I didn't find any answer in his collection. Did you ever meet him after your time at the quarry, or no?
No. What it was about, it's not really so impersonal. I'd made love to his girlfriend. I know it's his girlfriend.
You mentioned
I was stupid. And he was very, very upset about it. So me, so there was a girl. And I knew it was his friend, but not his girlfriend. But he accused me of being unfriendly to him. And I didn't really, I was hurt by it, but I didn't understand what had happened. In some ways, I'm not a very clever guy, You can't be clever about everything.
And this guy I asked you about, Serge Butterlin, you have no memory of ever seeing his name anywhere. He was at Harvard for a while. He got an MBA there, and then he became something of a corporate consultant on issues of space. So he would go to various fairs in Seattle, for example, and study how different companies set up their corporate spaces in those fairs, and then would study how people respond to those spaces. He did quite a bit of work with Hall and also with McLuhan, and then got involved with the countercultural scene and the rain dance crowd, but you don't remember him.
Well, I remember his name.
Buturlin. He wrote an article on environmental management and spent some time at the Howard Weiss Gallery. I don't know if you ever spent time in that circle.
Which one?
Howard Weiss Gallery in New York.
No.
A lot of video art was sort of Frank Gillette and Paul Ryan. But anyway, he just seemed like an interesting figure who, did a lot of stuff in space.
I remember his name when you when you gave me the name. I remember the name, but I didn't remember anything about him in particular. And
all right. You couldn't have met everybody. But look, so two last things logistically. So I'm still deciding when I can come, and it's not really a matter of deciding, it's a matter of finding the 3 days that I can visit. So right now I think there are two options. It's either maybe last days of September, when I'll just have a few free days in Europe and I can maybe fly in for a day or two and we can spend more time together talking about the archive. Or it will be mid-November, maybe November 22nd or so, when I'll just be in Sweden anyway, and I might just come to Norway or Sweden or wherever you are. So I don't know if you have made plans for those dates. If you haven't, it's easier if you have.
It's far ahead for me. I mean, it's okay too. Whichever gives you the last days of September is okay. As I see it now.
And you will be in Norway or Sweden at that point?
Well, I have decided, my wife and I have decided that we'll sell my house in Norway. But we will get some other place as a contact. And that we won't do that till January.
Okay.
So that's not really relevant in a sense. But that means that...
I just want to know where I should fly. I mean, I don't know. If I land in Oslo, I just take a train to a farm, or should I fly to Stockholm?
Yeah, I think that if you land in Oslo...
I can also land in Sweden. I just want to know what's the closest airport.
You land in Norway. Because it's 2 hours and a half by train to Arvika, which is right close to my place here, and it's another half an hour to my farm. So one would best go to Norway and.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind as I look at I'll make up my mind in the next 2 weeks about the dates, so we'll have more certainty. And then
it would be nice if you came here because we would have more time and
for sure
to see you and share life a little bit.
Yeah, and also chat, somewhat more informal because I also want to talk. I don't just want to ask questions all the time. But
you're okay in my book.
Good. But also your archive. So you said your niece will be helping you to get them organized somewhat.
Well, somewhat. We need to know more about organizations. What do they want? How they take.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think it's, to be honest, it's pretty informal there. It's a guy there who is just very interested in cybernetics, so he made sure that the archives of both Heinz von Foster and Gordon Pask end up there. And, I mean, they have other archives also, so it's a proper archive. And it's very flexible. So my advice would be for you to not necessarily to make a listing of everything, even though a listing made by you, or at least narrated by you, even on a tape, would be very helpful. But just to have an inventory of what is available, and then, I can help you narrow it down, or he will tell you himself. But I've seen Gordon Pask's collection. It's a lot of stuff. It's 300 boxes. So, and they were fine with all of them. So, if you bring 10 or 15 of yours, I don't think it will be a problem. I mean, I also don't know how much material you have there. I think, the more, it will be, also, there's something I wanted to ask. If you think we can find anything related to your period in the 60s and 70s, especially to the work at the lab, anything that happened in the quarry, that would be fantastic, because your work as in Norway is important also, but there you are part of many communities which, have their own historical significance, in cybernetics, MIT, Seymour Papert, McCulloch. And I also know that period is probably the hardest to document, that it's so far, and you're not there. But if you can think of places where some of those documents might have remained, that would be helpful. I found quite a few of your letters in these various archives, and the least we can do is to deposit electronic copies of those letters in your own archive, right? So at least the fact that it's in Vienna would be very helpful here, because informally this person who runs the archives will always show those letters to whoever comes visiting. But if you do it formally through a proper university archive, they have to go through all sorts of complicated copyright clearance forms, and they would not even put those letters from other archives in their own archive. Understand?
Yeah.
But the best thing to do would be for you to think really hard, if any other material from the 60s might be retrievable from anywhere. In the Bateson archive, for example, I found a brochure or some kind of a prospectus. I don't remember whether it was the Bateson archive or the Hall archive, about your environmental ecology lab. So there is actually a document stating what it is and what it does, which is the first time I saw something describing it, like on letterhead. If you can think at all of where such materials can be also, that will be very helpful. Because the materials I saw, the ones that you brought to Oslo, they are fantastic because they are your papers and they are the published material. But anything that might be letters, drafts, project reports, that stuff, your proposals to NASA are very good. Anything of that kind would be helpful.
Okay.
So, I don't know how we'll go about locating them, but, to think through that would help. But even the stuff that you have now will already make a fantastic addition to the archives. So don't stress out too much. If you have some spare time and desire, think about that. But if not, just describing the documents you've already shown me in a way that will make them more accessible to researchers would be a good first step. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So, making a listing, putting some dates on documents where dates are missing, maybe writing a few sentences of the context. So if that NASA proposal, for example, the ideal would be, I have this data because you told it to me in an interview, but even writing 2 or 3 sentences describing the context in which that proposal was written, that somebody commissioned it, somebody asked it, why it was killed, you told me that the president thought it will be like Nazism, whatever. Stuff like this, to clarify some of the context would be very helpful.
Yeah.
So, of course, then the oral interviews we've done, eventually I'll transcribe them and I'll put them up somewhere so people will be able to consult them as well. But anything else you can say about that project of studying blind children, fantastic, the pilot school study, this is very good. Any context basically will help, I think, and how you decide to preserve it, whether to make a short audio statement and then to have it transcribed, or to just type this, or to have somebody type this, it's up to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, but other than that, I think it's good that we are getting those archives somewhere, because I think it's I can't believe that people won't pick up interest in it. I mean, they must. It's just, it's now seeing the sudden explosion of interest in all the stuff around Pasca and Negroponte. I mean, your turn is just around the corner, so I would start getting ready in advance.
Okay.
Good. Okay, Warren. So I'll let you go. Thank you so much, and I hope we'll see each other in the fall. For sure, we will see each other in the fall. So
I look forward to that.
All right, Warren. Thanks again, and have a nice holiday there.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.